How do you have the money talk with your parents as they get older? And why do you even need to? Answers to those questions and more with a first-time guest here on Debt Free in 30, starting right now.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
We know from the Hoyes Michalos Joe Debtor bankruptcy study that seniors carry a lot of debt and are increasingly having to resort to filing a consumer proposal or bankruptcy to deal with that debt. But debt is not the only problem that seniors face financially. Seniors have to navigate a complicated financial world. When my parents were young, they went into the bank to make a deposit. That's not a thing anymore. Today, everything is electronic. We pay all of our bills online. So to get by in today's financial world, you need to know how to navigate bank websites and apps and two-factor authentication, and it's not easy. And as you get older, the pace of change gets to you and it's harder to keep up. On today's show, I have a first-time guest, Cameron Huddleston. I talked to her from her home in Kentucky. She wrote a new book called Mom and Dad, We Need to Talk: How to Have Essential Conversations with Your Parents About Their Finances. That's not easy because since the day you were born, your parents were your parents. You went to them for help and advice, not the other way around. But now, as they get older, well, they still have more life experience than you. You probably have more experience navigating the world of electronic banking and everything else to do with the new world of finances. But it's hard to switch roles and become the person who helps your parents instead of the other way around. So how do you know if your parents need help? And how do you start the conversation? To find out, here's my conversation with Cameron Huddleston. Who are you and what do you do?
I am Cameron Huddleston. I am a financial journalist. I've been writing about personal finance for more than 17 years, and I have my first book out called Mom and Dad, We Need to Talk: How to Have Essential Conversations with Your Parents About Their Finances.
Well, so let's talk about that then. That's an excellent topic to start with. So I read your book. I thought it was great. And the first thought I had was, okay, obviously our parents are older than us. They have more life experience. They may be smarter than us. They've certainly had more years of experience managing money, certainly more years than we would have. So why is it that we need to talk to them about money?
It's a very good question. And I think a lot of people think that way. Why do I need to have this conversation? My parents' finances are none of my business, or, hey, I'm sure they're on top of their financial act. The truth is, there will likely come a point in your parents' lives when their finances will be your business because they might need your help as they age. You might have to become a caregiver. They might become victims of scammers as they age. Lots of different reasons why you might need to get involved with their financial life. Of course, everyone dies, and you will certainly have to get involved then to deal with what they've left behind. And if you think your parents are on top of their financial act, they might be, but there's a good chance they aren't. Survey after survey shows that many adults, they don't have a will, they're not prepared for retirement. Lots of different reasons why your parents aren't potentially prepared for life as they get older. And it's so important to have these conversations sooner rather than later, before that emergency arises, before you get the call that mom and dad need help, so that you have things in place so that you can step in and start helping them out.
Now, in the book, you give a lot of stories. Your story, there's a story from a guy named Doug, which I thought was great because, hey, I know that name. So that is kind of woven throughout the entire book. Can you maybe give us a quick overview of, one of those stories, either your story or Doug's story or one of the others? Because I think all of those stories illustrate the point you just made, which is you got to have this chat before it's too late.
Certainly. I think I'll try to touch on both of those that you mentioned. The big reason I wrote this book is because of my experience with my mother. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease when she was 65. I was only 35. Certainly, I was not thinking at that point in my life, when I had two small children at the time, that I was going to have to become a caregiver from my mother. And I had not had conversations with her about her finances, certainly not detailed conversations. And so I had to scramble. Fortunately, we got in with an attorney and updated her estate planning documents. She named me power of attorney. She named me her healthcare proxy, updated her will. We did those things while she was still competent enough to sign those documents. If you are no longer mentally competent, you can't sign those documents. It's too late. And this is where Doug's story comes into play. Doug's father also was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. His father had not named him power of attorney. So when Doug got a call in the middle of the night saying that his father was in the hospital having emergency surgery, he had to fly from Hawaii to Colorado, and Doug could not access his father's bank account to pay the bills, the medical bills. His father ended up in a nursing home for a while because his father had not named him power of attorney. So Doug had to go through the court process to become what in America is called a conservator, to get that legal right to access his dad's financial accounts. He spent 9 months and $10,000 doing that.
Yeah, and in Canada, the system is, it's kind of similar. You can't just act for somebody if there's no paperwork or anything. So the worst case scenario then is what? Exactly what you just described, that you just simply can't act on behalf of your parents. So what can happen in the worst case scenario?
Right. So say your mom has a stroke and your father's no longer living, and it's up to you, the child, to step in and help out to make sure those bills are getting paid. Maybe it's a medical bill. Maybe it's, her electricity bill, her rent for her apartment. You think that you can go to the bank and say, hey, my mom has had this medical emergency. I need to pay her bills for her. The bank's going to say, well, has your mother designated you as her power of attorney, as someone who has access to the accounts? Are you on these accounts? If you're not, you can't pay the bills for mom. And, you can't talk to the doctors if your parent has designated you as a healthcare proxy. It becomes a nightmare, honestly, and like I said, it can become very expensive if you had to go through the legal process of being named conservator or guardian so that you can actually step in and make medical and financial decisions for your parent. And, this means your finances could take a big hit. And it's not just the medical emergency. It could be something a lot less urgent that could come up. For example, your parents might need long-term care. And if they have no plan for that, and you are your parents' plan, and you're the one who has to be the caregiver, you might not be prepared financially to step into this role. Oftentimes being a caregiver is a full-time job. And if your family is relying on your income to support them and you have to stop working to care for a parent, of course your finances are going to take a big hit. And if you had had these conversations with your parents sooner, mom and dad, what's your plan for long-term care if you ever need it? If you started these conversations sooner, you can explore your options. You can help your parents figure out if there's a way to pay for this so that they're not necessarily relying on you for this sort of help.
So in your book, you explain that in a lot more detail. Here are all the different things that can potentially go wrong. Here are all the things you need to think about. And so as I read it, it's like, yeah, okay, this all seems obvious to me. That's not the hard part. The hard part is, how do I then broach this subject? And that's really the main theme of the book, I guess, is how do you actually have this conversation? So question number one, why is it a problem? Why is it a problem to take mom and dad aside and say, hey, let's open your bank book and talk about your money? Why is it an issue?
Well, because people think money is a taboo topic, especially older generations who were likely taught by their parents, you don't talk about money. And so even though your parents hopefully should trust you, they still might think as the child, this is none of your business. That's one thing you have to overcome, getting past that obstacle of, the taboo topic. Your parents might be embarrassed about their financial situation and they don't want to talk to you about it. There are a variety of reasons they might be reluctant to have this conversation. I think, though, that adult children are likely to build it up in their head that this conversation is going to be a lot more difficult than it is. Yes, your parents might find it awkward, but, of course, as we've discussed, the consequences of not having the conversation are a lot worse And oftentimes, if you approach the conversation from a very caring, respectful position, first of all, realizing, yes, these are your parents. I don't want to come in and certainly point out anything I think they're doing wrong. You want to come in letting your parents know that you want to have the conversation out of love because they took care of you and you want to return that favor if they ever need your help someday. And you want to have this conversation to get some information. No, it doesn't need to be, let's open up your bank book and look at the figures. You certainly don't. If you know money is a taboo topic from your parents, don't make the conversation about money initially. Make it about the big picture. Mom and Dad, what does retirement look like for you? Or how is retirement going for you? Is it what you expected? Their answers are going to give you clues as to how they're doing. They might say, well, retirement is great. I'm glad we set up things so well. Oh, really? Can we talk a little bit more about that? What did you do? I'd love to hear what you did to make your retirement so great. Of course, asking your parents for advice. If their answer is, retirement's been really difficult for us, we thought we'd be able to travel more. Then you ask more questions. Well, why can't you travel more? Maybe I can give you some tips on how to save money on travel. Don't stop when they answer that big picture question. Keep asking more questions, but do it gently. You don't want to push too hard and scare your parents away. You don't want to ask for too many details too quick, like how much do you have in your retirement savings account? Really, that doesn't matter. You just need to know, is there income that's coming in? What have you done to plan for, the end of life? Do you have that will? Do you have those other estate planning documents, the power of attorney? Do you have a way to pay for long-term care? Asking these questions, not all at once, but over time, and this might take several conversations, but letting your parents know, I'm not doing this because I'm trying to be selfish. I'm not doing this because I think you've made mistakes. You don't want it to approach it that way at all. You want to approach it from, I am your child, I love you, and I want to be able to help you if you ever need help. And that's why I want to have these conversations so we can get on the same page, so we can have a plan, and so we can make sure things are in place so that I could step in if you ever do need help.
And you go through a lot of examples in your book of how to get that conversation started. You mentioned one of them, which is asking them for advice. So, okay, you're already retired. I'm thinking about that now. I've already got a few gray hairs starting. I got to start thinking about that too. How did you do it? What advice can you give me? And that obviously leads into some of the things you just said, that, oh, it's going great, or it's not going so great. In the book, you also talk about timing. So, and I believe, if I may paraphrase what you said Christmas dinner is probably not the time to be having this conversation. So am I correct in that? And if so, when is a good time to be having this conversation?
Yeah, so a lot of people think that the holidays are the perfect time to have this conversation because family's together, your siblings might be there, and you think, hey, we're all sitting down together for a meal. Let's talk about this. This is not the time you want to do it. The holiday meals are for celebrating, not for having what could potentially be a tense conversation. And there might be people there who don't need to be part of the conversation. Oftentimes there's alcohol too. And if someone's had a few too many glasses of wine, the conversation can become heated very quickly. So at the least, wait until the day after a holiday meal. If that is the only time when you are there with mom and dad and you can actually talk to them face to face. But I would encourage you, rather than sitting down and starting to dig really deep into this sort of information, just let your parents know that you want to have the conversation. Hey, mom and dad, I'd really like to talk to you about this. We don't have to do it now. It's the holidays. This is a time for celebrating. But let's pick a time when we can all either sit down or hop on a Skype call, FaceTime, whatever, and start having these conversations. Give them a heads up, because you don't want to spring it on them and then, risk them saying, wait, hold on. No, I'm not ready to have this conversation. Give them time to digest it. You might even, and I suggested this in my book, you might even want to write your parents a letter, an invitation of sorts to have this conversation. It gives them a chance to basically digest what you're asking, think about it, process it, and make it clear, though, that, this conversation is going to happen. I'm inviting you to have this conversation, but I'm really not going to take no for an answer. I do want to have this conversation, but I'm going to let you decide when it's okay to have it. We're going to schedule a time to have the conversation and sit down and talk. So don't do it during the holiday meal. Wait till at least afterward, and don't spring it on your parents necessarily out of the blue. I mean, certainly you can use a variety of ways to start the conversation. Use a story, talk about someone you know, perhaps whose parents died without a will, like you mentioned, and like I wrote in the book, ask for their advice. You can talk about those what if scenarios. What if this happened, mom and dad? What do I need to know so that I can help you out? Lots of different ways you can actually get the conversation started.
Yeah, and I like that idea of piggybacking on a recent news event that, oh, did you hear that this is what happened to so-and-so? What would you do in a similar situation? So you had a couple of other points there. One of them is alcohol shouldn't be involved. So I guess we won't be sponsored by the Beer Drinkers Association for this podcast. You also mentioned the word siblings, though. So this, to me, creates a different dynamic. If you're an only child, well, then it's you and your parents, and that's all there is to it. But I would assume when siblings are involved, there's more involved in it. So, I live close to my parents, my other siblings don't, or vice versa. I'm a male or I'm a female. I want to inherit the house, they don't. I want the, whatever. And for those people who are watching on YouTube, in the back of the screen here, I have an old radio, which is my inheritance from my father. And he's not dead, but I was over at his house a few years ago and I said, oh boy, when you're gone, the one thing I want is that radio. And he said, well, why'd you take it now? So I put it in my car and off I went. So it's always good to have the conversation right up front. So let's talk about siblings then. What is your advice for not only getting your parents on side, but for getting the siblings on side so that in the event it becomes an issue, we're already on the same page?
I think it's important to have these conversations with your siblings before you even talk to your parents. And I say this for several reasons. First of all of you want to get on the same page. You want to figure out when you should try to have the conversation with mom and dad, how you're going to do it, what sort of approach, and which one of you is the best person to start the conversation. Maybe it's all of you. Maybe all of you have a wonderful relationship with each other and with your parents, and you feel like all of you should be there when you have the conversation. But that's not always the case. There might be one child who has a better relationship with mom and dad. That child might not be you. It might be your older sister or your younger brother. And so deciding on which child is most likely to get the best response from parents, that can be part of this conversation with your siblings. So figuring out who's going to have the conversation, whether it's all of you, one of you. You also want to talk about, when you have these conversations with your siblings, what your roles will be in your parents' lives going forward. Agreeing on this before you talk to your parents can actually make it easier when you talk to them, letting them know, hey, we've all talked, we want to be able to help you out. And I think I might be able to help you out with the financial side of things. I'm willing to be your power of attorney if you want to give me that power. And my younger brother is willing to help make healthcare decisions for you. And my big sister, she lives closest to you, so she's willing to help out if you need, help getting to the doctor's appointments, or if you ever need any sort of long-term care. Going to your parents with these decisions already made can make it easier for them, because they know that you're looking out for them and that there's not going to be fighting, hopefully, among you. Because a lot of times parents are worried that their kids are going to start fighting, and they don't want to have these conversations because they don't want those fights to erupt among their kids. So certainly make time to have these conversations with your siblings before you talk to your parents.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because if there's multiple siblings involved, they'll each have different skills. I'm the accountant in the family, so probably if there's something to do with accounting and money and tax returns, I'm the logical guy to do it, and my other siblings would be more qualified in other areas. So what do you do then if, so you meet with the siblings, everybody's on side, we agree that Joe's going to be the one who's going to make the first conversation, whatever, and you hit a wall. So your parents say, yeah, you know what? We don't want to have this conversation. We don't need to have this conversation. And I think you've already given us some advice on that. If they don't think there's a need for the conversation, then, well, tell some stories. Did you hear about what happened to this other person and so on? What is your other advice then when you hit the wall to get the conversation started?
So certainly some parents are going to be reluctant to talk, regardless of the approach you use. Couple of different things you can do. One, if you know that one parent might be more receptive than the other, you could try talking to that parent individually. Hey, mom, listen, I know dad feels really uncomfortable talking about this, but I think it's so important. It's especially important, mom, because I want to make sure that as you age, if something were to happen to dad, that you would be okay. So maybe, you can start by talking to dad to make sure, you know what accounts you have and whether you have access to the bank account, or whether, if you have separate accounts, you might not be able to access his account once he dies. So maybe starting with one parent and encouraging that parent to get the other parent to start having conversations might be productive. Certainly reaching out to a third party, a financial planner, an attorney, an accountant, someone your parents are already working with, and saying, hey, I know you can't share details about my parents' finances with me, but it would be great if you could encourage them to have these conversations with us, maybe reaching out to a family friend or, another relative or someone, a clergy member, and saying, please, these conversations, we need to be having them. Can you please encourage mom and dad to be talking to us, highlight all the benefits. Perhaps if you've had the conversation with your children, talk about how it's been so beneficial for your family. Getting that third party involved, they might be more willing to listen to a peer or a professional than listening to you, the child. Those are certainly some ways you can do it. And certainly if your parents don't want to talk about their finances, they might be willing to write down some information. So telling them, hey, you don't need to tell me this, but at least if you can put some things in writing, where the estate planning documents are, a list of your accounts, put it someplace safe and tell us where to find it and under what situations we can access that information. They might be willing to do that if they're not willing to tell you anything.
Yeah, and I like that idea of bringing in a third party. So, okay, I don't want you to be telling me what's in your will, but have you at least talked to the lawyer about making a will? So it doesn't have to be me involved. We just want to make sure that item is checked off the list. So there's, again, tons of information in the book that goes through this, but maybe you could throw out one or two things that need to be considered or discussed. So you just mentioned one, wills. You also talked about powers of attorney. And I mean, here in Ontario, there is a power of attorney over property. There is a power of attorney over, medical care, that sort of thing. Those are two different things. So that's something that should be discussed up front. I guess. So what are some other things that should be discussed up front then that would be on that? I mean, you've got in your book checklists that have, dozens of items. So can you throw out another 2 or 3 that should be thought about in advance?
Certainly. You want to find out how your parents are paying their bills. And this is going to help you be prepared if there is that medical emergency. Are they paying them by check or have they set up automatic bill pay? Because if they're paying them by check and you have to step in and pay those bills for them when something happens, are you going to be able to sign those checks for them? If it's set up by automatic bill pay, that's going to make things easier. And you want to encourage your parents to do that. You can even offer to help them. Hey, mom and dad, let me help you set up automatic bill pay. Maybe they're reluctant. They think, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this online. I'm going to become my information is going to be stolen. And you can encourage your parents to say, by saying, you know what, this is actually going to make things safer for you. Yes, there are data breaches out there and people hack into financial institutions, into their accounts. But mom and dad, if you aren't checking your accounts online regularly, someone could have accessed them already and you don't even know until the end of the month when you get that statement. If you can check your accounts once a week online, you can keep track of them better and catch fraud. So let me help you set it up. Then you're going to make sure your bills are getting paid on time. You don't have to worry about them being late. Offering to help them with a financial task is certainly one way to start the conversation, to get them to start opening up, to give you some access to their financial information. So finding out how they pay their bills is certainly important. The more information you can get about their finances, the better. But those long-term care talks are super important because it does take planning. And the sooner you have those conversations, the sooner you know what role your parents expect to play, the sooner you can start figuring out whether there's someone else who can step in and help your parents out, whether they can afford care. Those conversations certainly need to be happening sooner rather than later. I did not have those conversations with my mom until she had already developed Alzheimer's. And it was certainly more difficult when she needed to move into assisted living. When we were at that point, I was having a conversation with someone who was forgetting those conversations 10 minutes later. And so I had to make the decision for my mom. I would have felt much better if I had, early on had said, let's think about this. Let's talk about the type of care you would want to get. Having to make that decision for your parents is not an easy one. And you can let your parents know this. I don't want to have to make these decisions for you. I want to know what you want. Let's talk about this now so we can, be on the same page about what you do want. Those things are certainly key. And like you said, in my book, I've got a long list of things that you need to find out. So certainly, yes, the more information you can get, the better. But those 3 things, the estate planning documents, how they pay their bills, that long-term care discussion, they're so important to have.
Excellent. And so I want to finish with practical advice, even though we've just spent the last, 25 minutes talking about practical advice. So you hit on the idea of bill payments and how that all works. And so to me, one of the obvious ways to do that, because everything's done online now, is to have access online to your parents' bank accounts, so that if you're both with the same bank, well, you can add the accounts so they're all there, so you can see your parents' accounts at the same time. Now, obviously, they may not be comfortable with that, but if it's a case of I need to, pay your hydro bill when you're in the hospital, there's a really quick way to do it. It can be done really quickly if I have access online. Now, the other tip you gave in the book, and this shows that I'm an accounting guy because I thought this was like the best tip in the book. No one else will have told you this was the best tip in the book. But I thought the tip about having a Dropbox was absolutely brilliant. So can you explain what we're talking about? What is Dropbox and how can that help you coordinate with your parents?
Certainly. So I mentioned that sometimes your parents might be willing to write down information, even though they're not willing to tell you. Now, if your parents are willing to make a list of all of their financial accounts, their usernames, their passwords, their insurance policies, put it in writing in a computer file, the wonderful cloud network that's out there, you can take advantage of it. You can create a Dropbox account, and that lets you share files with multiple people. So your parents, you can set up the Dropbox account and then show your parents how they can save their files to this account so that you can access it when necessary. And it's there. And they can go in at any point and just simply update the document. Maybe they changed the password on their bank account. All they had to do is log in, go into their computer, open up that file, make the change, save it again to the Dropbox, and there it is for you so that you can access it when you need it.
Yeah, it's a fantastic and dead easy thing. There's a file folder on their computer. They put a Word document, an Excel document, whatever, and they put this information in. And obviously you want to have it password protected. And I'm sure the security advocates will tell us that there's some flaw with that. But I think that is better than a Post-it note on a computer if I had to pick options. So I think that makes perfect sense. So that's some great advice. And again, in your book, there's tons and tons of other information. The book is called Mom and Dad, We Need to Talk: How to Have Essential Conversations with Your Parents About Their Finances. The book here in Canada is available on Amazon.ca. It's available at Chapters and Indigo and bookstores like that. So it's not hard to find. How can people track you down?
It's pretty easy. You can go to CameronHuddleston.com, and there are links there to buy my book. There's information about me. I also have a couple of free resources that people can use. Right up at the top of my webpage, there's a little tab that you can click on for resources. I've got a free downloadable fill-in-the-blank financial inventory that you can give to your parents so they can put everything in writing for you. Or they could save it as a PDF file and save it to the Dropbox. I've also got a scam red flags sheet that you can print out for your parents, give it to them, and you can use that to start the conversation. Hey, Mom and Dad, I found this great resource online. It's about scam red flags. Hang it up on your refrigerator, hang it up by the phone, and then if you get calls, that sound like any of these scam red flags, you're going to know that this is someone who's just trying to get your money, or if you get an email. Great way to start the conversation with your parents too. And it's free on my website.
Free. Everybody likes that. Free. CameronHuddleston.com. Cameron, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. That was my conversation with Cameron Huddleston, author of Mom and Dad, We Need to Talk: How to Have Essential Conversations with Your Parents About Their Finances. As I said in the interview, her book is available on Amazon and at bookstores across Canada, including Chapters and Indigo. I agree with Ms. Huddleston. It is important to be on the same page with our parents and siblings when it comes to finances. In fact, I talked about this issue in my book, Straight Talk on Your Money, in myth number 18, where I said that we are not immortal. I even included a death checklist in the book. So I agree this is an important issue. And yes, Straight Talk on Your Money is still available in bookstores, so when you go to pick up Cameron's book, you can get mine too. Okay, enough with the gratuitous commercial. Back to my point. We need to talk to our parents about finances before it's too late. We all agree that having a will is important and a power of attorney that covers both property and personal care is important, but I also think it's very important to talk to your parents about debt. Yes, a lot of Canadians enter their pre-retirement and retirement years carrying debt, and that's a big problem. It's hard enough making ends meet when you're working and have a full paycheck. It's even more difficult when you're trying to service debt on a fixed income. So, as Cameron suggests in her book, it's a good idea to find out whether or not your parents have any debt. And if they do they have a plan to pay it off before they retire or in the near future if they're already retired? If not, you may be the only person who can explain their debt relief options, and that may be one of the greatest gifts you can give your parents. Sadly, the most common age for people to file a bankruptcy or a consumer proposal is in their mid-40s, because not only are you supporting your family, but you may also be helping your parents financially. And if part of that help is because of debt, you can help both you and your parents by eliminating that debt now. That's our show for today. I hope we generated some food for thought. Thanks for listening and watching on our Debt Free in 30 YouTube channel. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.